I wish I could say I was surprised, but I wasn't. I'd felt the shift long before I ever picked up her phone that night. The slow, creeping distance, the absent stares, the forced laughter that didn't quite reach her eyes. At first, I chalked it up to the postpartum depression. She had struggled hard after our second child was born, and I tried to be understanding, to be patient. But patience didn't explain why I felt like a stranger in my own home. It started with little things. She'd roll away from me in bed. She'd sit on the couch with her phone angled just slightly away, her thumb moving too fast across the screen. She'd sigh when I asked if everything was okay. The woman I had known, the woman I had built a life with, was slipping away. Still, I told myself it was all in my head, that things would get better once she felt more like herself again. But that night, when she left her phone face down on the counter and disappeared upstairs, something in me broke. I picked it up. My hands shook as I unlocked it. She hadn't changed the passcode. She hadn't even bothered to hide it. Maybe she thought I'd never check. Maybe she thought I trusted her too much. Maybe, deep down, she wanted to get caught. The texts were the first thing I saw. A full year of messages with him, a family friend, someone we had over for dinner, someone I had laughed with, toasted beers with, trusted. And there, in black and white, was proof that while I was breaking my back holding this family together, my wife had been pouring her heart, her words, her desires into another man. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. But then, the words hit me like a sledgehammer. I wish I could touch you right now. God, if only my husband knew what I was thinking about. That night, in my head, over and over again, I scrolled faster, my breathing shallow, sexting, talking about our sex life, comparing me to him, fantasizing about threesomes, for Christ's sake. And then the picture, my wife, nude. The timestamp made my stomach lurch. Weeks after giving birth to our daughter, I felt sick. My throat closed up. My hands were sweating so badly the phone nearly slipped from my grasp. I stopped reading. I couldn't take any more. My entire marriage flashed before my eyes. 6 years of love, of shared dreams, of raising children together. I had thought we were a team. I had thought that no matter how hard things got, we would always be a team. But I was wrong. I sat there for hours, staring at the screen, my mind running in loops. The rage hit first, hot and uncontrollable. I wanted to storm upstairs, shake her awake, demand to know how she could do this to me to us. But then came the hurt, the deep, gutting ache of betrayal. Because it wasn't just about the messages. It wasn't even just about him. It was the fact that for an entire year, she'd been lying to me. For 12 months, she had carried on this hidden life behind my back. She had smiled at me, kissed me, held our newborn baby in her arms, while sneaking off to text him, and I had been too blind to see it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw her phone across the room. Instead, I placed it gently back on the counter, exactly where she had left it. Then I went upstairs, climbed into bed beside her, and stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. The next few weeks were a blur. I tried to act normal. I told myself I needed time to figure out what to do, that confronting her in the heat of the moment would only lead to more pain. But the truth was, I was scared. Scared of what she would say. Scared of what it would mean for our family. Scared that once the words were spoken aloud, there would be no going back. I went through the motions. I played with the kids, went to work, came home, sat across from her at the dinner table, pretending I didn't know. Pretending I wasn't dying inside. She must have noticed something was off. She started watching me differently, her brows knitting together when I barely responded to her questions. One night, as we got into bed, she hesitated. "Are you okay?" I forced a nod. "Just tired." She didn't push. She rolled over, back to me, like she had so many nights before. And I lay there, staring at the ceiling, knowing that this was the moment our marriage ended, even if she didn't know it yet. 3 weeks passed before I finally broke. It happened on a random Tuesday. It's nothing special about that day. No grand catalyst, just me, standing in the kitchen, watching her laugh at something on her phone, and something inside me snapped. "Who are you texting?" I asked. She blinked, caught off guard. "What?" I folded my arms. "I asked who you were texting." She hesitated for only a second, but it was enough. My stomach clenched. "Just Rachel," she said, naming a mom from our son's preschool. She was still lying. Even now, I took a deep breath, my pulse hammering in my ears. I know, I said quietly. Her expression faltered. What? I know, I repeated, my voice colder this time. She stared at me, her lips parting slightly. 1,000 emotions flickered across her face, confusion, fear, realization then, for the first time in weeks. She truly looked at me, and I saw it. The guilt, the panic, the silent, sinking understanding that she had just lost any chance of talking her way out of this. I let the words hang between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she swallowed. I don't. I cut in, my voice sharper than I intended. Don't lie to me. Not anymore. She closed her mouth, her throat bobbed, and then, for the first time since this nightmare began, she started to cry. Asterisk, I had imagined this moment 1,000 times. Sometimes I pictured myself screaming, slamming my fist into the wall, demanding answers. Other times, I saw myself cold and detached, tearing into her with the kind of sharp, merciless words that would cut deep. But now that it was happening, now that she was standing in front of me, her face pale, her lips trembling, her eyes already glassy with tears, I didn't feel rage. I felt empty. She wiped at her cheek, her breath shaky. I don't know what you think you saw, but don't. My voice came out hoarse, drained. Don't insult me like that. Her shoulders tensed. I took a step closer, just enough to make her look up at me. I went through your phone. I saw everything. Her mouth opened, then closed. She blinked rapidly, like she could force back the truth if she just kept her tears at bay. I shook my head, my jaw tight. A year, an entire year, and you never thought I'd find out. She pressed a hand against her forehead. It's not what you think, really? A bitter laugh escaped me. So, you weren't sexting him. You weren't telling him about our marriage. You didn't send him. My throat clenched around the words. I couldn't say it. Couldn't force myself to relive that goddamn picture. Her tears spilled over. She wiped at them quickly, as if erasing them could erase the damage. I wasn't cheating on you, I scoffed. Oh, so you're seriously going with that? She nodded, desperation creeping into her voice. I never touched him. We never met up. It was just what? I snapped. Just texting. Just humiliating me behind my back. Just sneaking around like I wouldn't notice. She squeezed her eyes shut, shoulders shaking. I was lonely. I froze. She sniffed, trying to catch her breath. I felt invisible. After the baby, after everything, I didn't feel like me anymore. She let out a bitter, choked laugh. I hated myself. I still do. I stared at her, my nails digging into my palms. So your solution was to find validation from him? She nodded weakly, and something inside me cracked. I turned away, pacing the length of the kitchen, trying to find something, anything to ground me. The weight of it all was too much. She wiped at her face again, her voice raw. I swear. I was trying to stop. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was hurting you, but I didn't know how to pull myself out of it. I spun back toward her. That's bullshit. She flinched. You weren't trying to stop. If you wanted to stop, you would have, but you didn't. You kept going for a year, even through the pregnancy, even after the baby. Do you have any idea what that means to me? She swallowed hard, her hands gripping the counter behind her like she needed it to stay upright. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. I want to know something. She lifted her gaze. I clenched my fists. When did it start? Her lips parted, and for a moment I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in the quietest voice, she whispered, before the pregnancy. I already knew. I had known from the texts. But hearing her confirm it still knocked the air from my lungs. I turned away, pressing my palms against the kitchen table, gripping the edge so hard my knuckles went white. Did you love him? My voice was barely above a whisper. She jerked her head up. No. I waited. Let the silence stretch between us, daring her to say more. She hesitated, then stepped closer, her voice trembling. I know you don't believe me, but I swear, never wanted him. I wanted to feel like someone saw me again. I squeezed my eyes shut, my breathing uneven. So what was I asked, turning to face her. What the hell was I if not the person who saw you every damn day? Worked, cooked, cleaned, took care of the kids. What part of me made you feel so invisible that you needed him instead? Her face crumpled, and she shook her head. It wasn't about you. I barked out a sharp, humorless laugh. That's rich. That's real fucking rich. I pushed past her, heading toward the stairs. I needed out of that kitchen, out of her. Reach, out of the suffocating air pressing down on me. She rushed after me. Wait, please. I stopped on the first step, but didn't turn around. I know I can't take it back, Sue said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know I broke something in you, but I never wanted to hurt you. I hate myself for it. For a second, just a second, I almost felt it, the smallest pull of sympathy, the tiniest flicker of the woman I used to love. Then I remembered the messages, the laughter she shared with him, the way she made a joke out of me, and whatever sympathy. I had died on the spot. You say you hate yourself? My voice was flat, cold. Good. At least now we have one thing in common. She gasped softly, her breath hitching. But I didn't stay to see her break any further. I climbed the stairs without looking back. The days that followed were quiet. She blocked his number in front of me. She swore. There was no more contact, that she was willing to do anything to fix this. I barely responded. I didn't know how to. At night, we slept in the same bed, but we might as well have been miles apart. We were roommates now, too. People coexisting in a home filled with echoes of what used to be. Then, 2 months later, her cousin announced a wedding, and he would be there. 2 months had passed since the confrontation. 78 days, to be exact. I counted every one of them. It wasn't the kind of thing you could just move on from. The moment I'd looked through her phone, everything changed. And even though she was here, even though she blocked his number, even though she cried and begged and swore she hated herself for what she did, still didn't recognize that woman in my house. She looked like my wife, sounded like my wife, but my wife wouldn't have done this. We lived as roommates now, nothing more. We spoke only when it was necessary. We passed each other in the hall, in the kitchen, in the nursery, careful not to touch, careful not to say too much, and in the quiet moments when I was alone, the memories of those texts played on repeat in my head. The words she typed to another man, the way she laughed about me behind my back. The fact that, even after everything, she had still tried to lie. If we didn't have kids, I would have been gone. That was the brutal, honest truth. But I wasn't willing to be a part-time dad. I wasn't willing to miss bedtimes and first steps and birthdays just because she had thrown away everything we built, so I stayed. Not for her. Not even for me. For them. The wedding was announced a few weeks ago. Her cousin, big event, family, flying in from all over, something no one could miss, including him the moment I heard his name. My hands clenched into fists. I had managed to avoid him so far. Ever since I confronted her, she assured me there had been no contact, but I had never actually spoken to him. Never given him the chance to try and explain himself, to spin some pathetic excuse to stand in front of me and act like he hadn't played a role in destroying my marriage. That was going to change. She must have seen something shift in my expression when the wedding came up, because, one evening, she hesitantly asked, "Are you going to say something to him?" I glanced at her across the living room. We hadn't talked about him in weeks, and now she was bringing it up. I leaned back, arms crossed. "You think I won't?" She swallowed, her hands gripping the blanket draped over her lap. "No. I just..." She trailed off, eyes flickering to our son playing with his toy trucks on the floor. I scoffed. "What? Worried I'll embarrass you?" Her head snapped up. "No." She hesitated. "I just don't want things to get worse." I laughed bitterly. "Worse? Worse than this?" I gestured around us at the hollow shell of a marriage. We're pretending to keep alive." She winced. "You know what I mean?" I didn't respond. I just looked at her. She had changed, too. Not just in my eyes, but in ways I didn't expect. She looked exhausted, smaller, somehow, like she had lost pieces of herself along the way. Maybe she had. Maybe we both had. But that didn't mean I could forgive her, and it sure as hell didn't mean I was going to let him walk around at that wedding without knowing exactly how I felt. The week leading up to the wedding was unbearable. She was nervous, I could tell. She fidgeted more, avoided eye contact, barely spoke. Every time I caught her glancing at me, it was like she was waiting for the inevitable explosion. I wasn't sure what I was going to say to him. I just knew. I had to say something. The thought of being in the same room as him made my blood boil. I had to keep my anger in check for the kids, for the sake of keeping the peace in front of family. But deep down, I wanted to tear him apart. For months, I had imagined what it would be like to finally stand in front of him, to let him see the damage he had done, to watch the regret creep across his face as he realized exactly who he had messed with. And now I had my chance. The night before the wedding, she approached me cautiously. As I sat at the dining table, I've been thinking, she said quietly. I didn't respond. Just waited. She inhaled shakily. I think we should try counseling. I let out a sharp exhale, shaking my head. Course you do. She flinched. I mean it. I know you're still angry. Angry doesn't even cover it. She nodded slowly, her hands twisting together. I get it. I do. But I want to fix this. I let out a bitter chuckle, leaning back in my chair. Fix this, I gestured between us. There is no fixing this. Her eyes welled up, and for a moment she just stood there, looking at me with this quiet kind of desperation. Then she whispered, if you didn't want to try, you wouldn't still be here. That one hit me in the gut. Because I didn't have an answer. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. That I was only here for the kids. That I didn't care anymore. But if that were true, why was I so angry? Why did I still feel every single inch of this betrayal like a fresh wound? I clenched my jaw. We'll see. Her breath hitched, but she nodded. That was the last thing we said to each other before heading to bed. Tomorrow was the wedding, and by the time it was over, he was going to know exactly how I felt. The wedding was held at a country club just outside the city. A beautiful venue, white draped chairs, floral archways. A dance floor under the open sky. Too bad I didn't give a damn about any of it. The moment we arrived, I was scanning the crowd, searching. My wife? No, not my wife, just the woman I lived with knowing guard near me, her hands twitching, her body tense. She knew what was coming. I wasn't the type to cause a scene. I wasn't the type to let things slide, either. And then Nee saw him. He was standing near the bar, laughing at something. Like nothing happened. Like he hadn't spent a year talking to another man's wife. Like he hadn't been a part of destroying a family. My blood boiled. I straightened my suit, adjusted my tie. Then I walked toward him. I felt her eyes on me, felt her breath hitch. But she didn't stop me. Good, because nothing in the world could have stopped me. He noticed me before I reached him. His laughter died, his shoulders tensed. He looked away, as if pretending he hadn't seen me would somehow make me disappear. I didn't stop walking. When I reached him, I spoke low, controlled. We need to talk. His Adam's apple bobbed. He hesitated. Then, with a stiff nod, he followed me outside to the patio. Away from the reception, the cool night air did nothing to calm me down. For a moment, we just stood there. I stared at him, taking him in the same man who had texted my wife things I couldn't erase from my mind. The man who had treated me like I was some clueless idiot. I clenched my jaw. Do you know what I think about every night? He swallowed hard, staying silent. I think about those messages. About how you and my wife laughed at me. How you talked about my marriage like it was some game. He shifted on his feet, rubbing the back of his neck. Man, I held up a hand. No, you don't talk. His mouth snapped shut. I stepped closer, my voice ice cold. You were my friend. I spat the word out like it was poison. You sat at my dinner table. You smiled in my face while you texted my wife behind my back. He let out a slow breath. It was a mistake. I tilted my head. A mistake? Which part? The sexting, the threesome talk. The nudes? I laughed bitterly. Tell me, which part was the accident? His face turned red. I know. My voice dropped, deadly quiet. You don't get to explain. You don't get to stand here and act like you didn't know exactly what you were doing. He blinked rapidly. His whole demeanor screamed guilt. Good. I leaned in. You should be grateful I'm not the kind of man who settles this with fists. His eyes widened. I let the moment stretch, let him wonder if maybe I would throw a punch. But I didn't, because that would be too easy. Instead, I gave him something worse. The truth. I want you to remember this moment, I said, my voice even. Because the next time you look in the mirror, I want you to see exactly what I see. Weak, pathetic excuse for a man. He paled. I smiled, but there was no humor in it. Enjoy the wedding. Then I turned and walked away. And just like that, it was over. When I stepped back inside, she was waiting for me. She looked like she wanted to say something, maybe to ask what I'd said, maybe to beg me to let this go. I brushed past her. She didn't follow. I wasn't sure if that made it better or worse. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I played my role. Smiled when I needed to. Laughed at the right moments. Pretended like I was just another guest enjoying the wedding. But under it all, I was tired, exhausted, not from the confrontation, not even from the rage, but from the weight of carrying all of this. At one point, I caught my wife watching me from across the room. Her eyes were sad, pleading. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anger. I just felt done. The drive home was silent. Our son fell asleep in the back seat, our daughter already out in her car seat. The soft hum of the road was the only sound between us. Finally, she broke the silence. "What did you say to him?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. I kept my eyes on the road. Enough. She shifted slightly, pulling her knees up onto the seat. "Did you hit him?" "No." She exhaled, almost in relief. I tightened my grip on the wheel. I wanted to. She nodded, biting her lip. "I wouldn't have blamed you." For a while, we didn't say anything else. Then, after a long pause, she whispered, "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" I inhaled sharply. That was the question, wasn't it? Could I? Did I even want to? I didn't answer. I just kept driving. And the silence between us grew heavier. Asterisk. We didn't talk about the wedding after that night. Not about him, not about what I said, not about the way she looked at me in the car. Waiting, hoping for some kind of answer, there was nothing left to say. I was still here. She was still here, but we weren't us anymore. A week passed, then two. The house still functioned. Diapers were changed, lunches were packed, bedtime stories were read. But every night, when the kids were asleep, we sat in separate spaces, trapped. In this silent war, neither of us could win. I didn't know what I was waiting for her to leave, for me to walk out. For some magical moment where I'd wake up and suddenly, just like that, the anger would be gone, it never happened. Instead, I found myself staring at her one night, watching her as she folded laundry on the couch, her face drawn, her fingers moving on autopilot, and it hit me. She wasn't the same person anymore. Maybe she never would be, and neither was I. It happened 3 nights later. I was brushing my teeth when she appeared in the doorway of the bathroom. Arms crossed, her face pale. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. I turned off the faucet, spit, wiped my mouth, then met her gaze in the mirror. She looked wrecked. Good, she should be. I placed my hands on the counter. "What part, exactly, can't?" "You do," her breath hitched. "This?" She gestured weakly between us. "Living like this, being strangers in our own home." I turned, leaning against the sink, arms folded. "Then you should have thought about that before you spent a year talking to another man." She flinched, like I had physically struck her. For a second, she didn't speak, just swallowed hard, eyes glistening. Then she said, "I never stopped loving you." I laughed, actually laughed, because what else was there to do? She took a step closer. "I mean it." I shook my head. "No, you don't." She did. I could see it in her face, but it didn't matter, because love doesn't do what she did. Love doesn't lie for a year. Love doesn't mock the person it's supposed to protect. Love doesn't send texts in the middle of the night to another man. Her bottom lip trembled. "I'm so sorry, are you?" I asked quietly. "Or are you just sorry you got caught?" Her breath shuddered. I was lost. I exhaled sharply. "And what do you think I've been? After everything?" I pushed off the counter, stepping forward, my voice low, firm. "You broke me." She started crying. "I know." "No, I don't think you do," I shot back. "Because if you really knew what this felt like, you wouldn't be standing here expecting me to just what? Let it go. Act like it didn't happen." She let out a sob, covering her mouth. I clenched my jaw. I should have felt satisfaction. Should have felt something watching her fall apart the way I had. But I didn't, because I was too damn tired. I dragged a hand over my face. "I don't know how to move past this." She lowered her hands, her expression raw. "Then let's get help," I scoffed. "Help," she nodded, sniffling. "Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes." I stared at her, feeling the weight of all of it. The betrayal, the anger, the exhaustion. The kids, and beneath it, all the tiniest, most pathetic ember of hope. Because as much as I hated what she had done, I had loved her once, And that part of Mitha, part that had spent years building a life with her, was still fighting. Maybe it shouldn't have been. Maybe I was an idiot for even considering it. But I had 2 little kids, sleeping down the hall. And if there was even the smallest chance I could fix this for them, I had to try. Even if it killed me. So I said it. Fine. She blinked. What? Will. Go to counseling. My voice was flat. I'm not promising anything, but I'll go. Her breath hitched. Okay. She wanted to say more, to thank me, to reach for me. But I turned, walked past her, and climbed into bed without another word. I wasn't doing this for her. I wasn't even doing it for me. I was doing it for them. Because at the end of the day, they deserved at least that much. Asterisk counseling was hell. Not because of the therapist, she was fine. Neutral, patient, professional. But because every session felt like peeling off a fresh layer of skin. Exposing raw, open wounds I had been trying to ignore. I sat across from my wife in that beige, softly lit office, listening to her talk about her feelings, her loneliness, and the entire time I wanted to scream, because no amount of therapy, no carefully chosen words, could erase the fact that she had made a choice. Over and over and over again. The first few sessions were just background. The therapist wanted to understand us, our history, the cracks that led to all of this. I had already seen the cracks. I had already fallen through them, but fine. I played along. I listened as my wife talked about how hard it was after the second baby, how she felt invisible, how she lost herself in motherhood. I kept my arms crossed, my expression blank. Because while I understood all of that, I couldn't understand this. I just needed something that felt like me again. She said one evening, her voice shaking. I know I chose the worst possible way to handle it, but I wasn't thinking. I felt like I had disappeared. I clenched my jaw. So what? You wanted someone to remind you you're still attractive? Her face twisted with guilt. I guess. Yeah. I let out a humorless laugh, shaking my head. The therapist leaned forward. How does that make you feel? I looked her dead in the eye, like I was never enough. Silence. My wife's lip trembled. That's not true, I exhaled. Slowly, my anger cold, steady. If it wasn't true, you wouldn't have done it. She closed her eyes, her hands gripping her knees. For the first time in our marriage. I didn't care if she was crying. I didn't care if she hurt, because had nothing left to give. Weeks passed, counseling forced conversations we had been avoiding. We dug into the past, into our marriage, into the moments where things started falling apart. And the more we talked, the more I realized this wasn't just about the messages. The truth was, I had lost her a long time ago. Long before I checked her phone. Long before the betrayal, somewhere between sleepless nights and mortgage payments. Between daycare pickups and doctor visits. We had stopped being us. She had found comfort in a man who made her feel seen. And I had been too exhausted, too focused on providing to see her slipping away. It didn't make what she did right, but for the first time, I understood how we got here. And I hated it. One night after the kids were asleep, she sat beside me on the couch. We hadn't touched in months. Hadn't kissed. Hadn't even shared the same blanket. But now, she was right there. She hesitated. Do you think we can come back from this? I exhaled slowly, staring at the dark TV screen. I don't know. She nodded, swallowing. I want to believe. We can, I turned to her. Do you? She blinked. What? I held her gaze. Do you really want me back? Or do you just want the idea of me, the life we built? Her breath caught, because she didn't have an answer. And that told me everything. The final counseling session came 3 months later. The therapist asked us where we saw ourselves in a year. My wife hesitated. Together, hopefully. I didn't say anything because I knew the truth. Some things don't heal. Some things don't go back to the way they were. I had tried. I had done everything I could. But at the end of the day, I would never see her the same way again. The night I told her. It was quiet. The kids were asleep. The house felt too big, too empty. She sat on the edge of the bed, already knowing what I was about to say. I took a breath. I can't do this anymore. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she didn't argue. She just whispered, I know. And that was it. No screaming. No begging. Just 2 people sitting in the ruins of what they had built. Finally admitting it was beyond repair, we worked out the logistics. I told her I wouldn't take the kids away from her. We agreed on schedules, on co-parenting, on keeping things as peaceful as possible. Because, in the end, this wasn't about punishing each other. This was about letting go. And it was the hardest thing I had ever done. The first night alone in my new apartment, I stared at the ceiling for hours. I had spent 6 years loving someone who had made me a fool. But now, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't broken. I was just free. And that was enough. That's the end of today's story. Did things turn out the way you thought? Or were there some surprises along the way? Share your thoughts in the comments side. Love to hear what you think. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you haven't joined the community yet, now's the perfect time. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're always the first to catch new stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next adventure.